We begin with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's complimentary statements about the Cuban leader. Today, he softened that praise. The CBC's Catherine Cullen has the details.
Do you think Fidel Castro was a dictator?
Yes.
Many would agree, given Fidel Castro's brutal repression of his political opponents and the fact his one-party system kept him in power for nearly half a century. The problem for Justin Trudeau is that yesterday, in front of an international audience at a meeting of la Francophonie, he called Castro a longtime friend of Canada.
Un ami de longue date du Canada et de ma famille.
Trudeau went even further in a statement, calling Castro a legendary revolutionary and orator, as well as a larger-than-life leader who served his people for almost half a century, which doesn't sound like a dictator. In fact, Trudeau also noted that he met Castro when his father passed away, and that Pierre Trudeau was proud to call Castro a friend. So how does that square with this? Do you think Fidel Castro was a dictator?
Yes.
And your statement yesterday reflected that?
The fact is, Fidel Castro had a deep and lasting impact on the Cuban people. He certainly was a polarizing figure, and there certainly were significant concerns around human rights.
Trudeau says he raised human rights when he was in Cuba just days ago, meeting with President Raul Castro, and then he raises it wherever he goes. This trip, his first official visit to Africa, was actually designed expressly to send a message about human rights by highlighting the rights of girls and women, even ones that might be controversial.
That means access to abortions. That means making sure that we're making contraception available.
He also called for equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered people. But he's getting much more international attention, much of it criticism now for his remarks on Castro. Trudeau says that he understands that there are people who had very difficult experiences in Cuba's history, that he wasn't trying to minimize that with his statement. He clearly hoped to smooth over this controversy today, but it looks like it may follow him back to Canada tomorrow. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Antananarivo, Madagascar. Do you think Fidel Castro was a dictator?
Yes.
Little awkward pause there, and yes, that is the focus of our Sunday Talk, where we tap into the hot debate of the week. Today, Justin Trudeau's comments about Fidel Castro. The Prime Minister is defending a statement he released where he called the former Cuban president a remarkable leader and set off a storm of outrage. There is personal history here. In 1976, then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau visited Castro and was roundly criticized for befriending a communist dictator.
It is indicative of Canadians' desire to maintain an independent foreign policy. There's something for us in trading with Cuba.
It's quite an amazing scene.
When Castro attended Trudeau's funeral in 2000, he and Justin Trudeau shared an emotional embrace.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is being sharply criticized for his praise of the former Cuban president.
And now he's getting his own serving of criticism for his eulogy that said, while controversial, Castro was a legendary revolutionary and orator who made significant improvements to Cuba's education and healthcare systems. Others were not so admiring.
I'm really happy, that Fidel is responsible for the death of a lot of people.
Opposition leader Rona Ambrose said her prayers are with Cubans who continue to endure Castro's long and oppressive regime. President Obama said history will judge Castro's impact. Around the world, pundits and politicians are calling Trudeau a fool and worse. Senator Ted Cruz called his eulogy disgraceful, and Senator Marco Rubio asked if it was a parody. And now the hashtag Trudeau Eulogies is trending, with fake tributes to other famous dictators, like Cambodia's Pol Pot. Joining us are panelists. Adrian Batre is the editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief at Walrus Magazine. And joining us tonight, Mark Entwistle, who was Canada's ambassador to Cuba in the mid-90s. He now runs a consulting firm that promotes Canadian business initiatives in Cuba. John, I'm going to start with you on this. What was your reaction when you heard the initial comments from the Prime Minister?
I thought it was an example of exactly the sort of naive campus leftism that a lot of people feared would be the hallmark of Justin Trudeau's foreign policy. I think in general, till now, he's been fairly hard-headed about most things. But this was one of these slip-ups where I think some sentimentalism about Castro from his family's past seeped into a prime ministerial press release, and I think he embarrassed himself, and he should backtrack.
Embarrassed himself?
Well, very much so. He's being made fun of around the world. I don't necessarily think we should care much what Ted Cruz thinks, but certainly, you know, the Washington Post had a roundup of this. It's become a meme of international diplomacy, this sort of, you know, these words, while controversial, you know, those words are supposed to sum up decades of dictatorship, of repression, of homophobia. You know, Castro put gay Cubans into prison camps, and to sum that up with the words "while controversial" and then go on to a few hundred words of just gushing praise for a dictator, it really rubbed people the wrong way, including me.
Mark, you actually knew the guy. You lived just down the road from him.
Yeah.
What did you think when you heard the statement from Justin Trudeau?
Well, I thought that that the Prime Minister was probably facing one of the challenges we have with discussing and explaining Cuba in general, which is our tendency to force Cuba into kind of an artificial binary choice between good and bad, or success or a failure. The problem or the challenge with Cuba is it's a tremendously nuanced place. And I think that, in fact, this tendency we have sometimes from the outside of Cuba to treat it as kind of a caricature and a bit cartoonish, and it's either this or that, doesn't reflect the nuance of Cuba, and is in a way a disservice to the Cuban people who live this contradiction in their everyday lives all the time. There's some things that the Cubans have done well, and other things they haven't done very well. And one of the things we've had a problem in Canada for a very long time is with individual political rights. It's been when I was ambassador, we used to talk to the Cubans all the time. But in other areas, they've been quite successful.
You're a former diplomat. Did the Prime Minister embarrass himself? Did he make a cartoon stand here?
As a former press secretary of the Prime Minister, I think probably there was some sloppy editing there, and it could have been more balanced. On the other hand, what you also get is some of the reaction to my earlier point. Ron Ambrose's statement, Kelly Leach made a statement, which is this kind of the same mistake in a way perhaps the Prime Minister made, but just the other way around. It's the exact same thing, because the Cuban reality is much more than the way they presented it at the same time.
Adrian, what did you think?
Well, it astonished me how tone-deaf the statement was. But, I mean, I agree with what Jonathan has already said. Like, it was so gushing. It was so over the top. It was emotional. I think what struck me is that in the entire time that this statement was being written, and to be sure, it wasn't written by the Prime Minister himself. I mean, perhaps he had a few words or a few lines in there that were personal. Someone in the Department of Foreign Affairs wrote that. How, with the army of staff around the Prime Minister, would they have not have said, you know, let's perhaps scale back from this and step back and recognize that the reason why we're saying that he was the longest serving leader of that country is because he's a dictator. How did they not acknowledge that this was going to go off and set off this epic storm that it has? And he has embarrassed himself. He's embarrassed our country, because he said in that statement, "I speak on behalf of all Canadians." Well, I don't think he did in that one, to be sure. So he has got to step back from this one. It seems from what I've seen from his staff and social media, they're not prepared to crawl this one back anytime soon. But this one's going to follow him when he gets back from whatever latest trip he's on.
But I guess the line here is, the man has died. Do you rejoice? Some Americans are rejoicing in that he's dead. Ron Ambrose was saying, not acknowledging anything that he's done. Like, what is the line when someone's died?
Well, generally, you don't speak ill of the dead. I think it's that's sort of the courtesy you pay to them in general. I mean, there are exceptions. When, you know, full-blown terrorist dies, for instance. But generally, you don't speak ill of the dead. But if you're going to say something, it should be balanced, and it shouldn't be in a spirit of sentimentality. And in Trudeau's case, I think he comes by it honestly. His brother Sasha wrote a piece for the Toronto Star 10 years ago in which he gushed about the Trudeau family's history with Castro and told these stories about how Castro never sleeps and he's like a Superman and he dived 50 feet into the water to get sea urchins for their dinner. I mean, it was like a North Korean propaganda newspaper. I mean, it was bizarre. And I think, to give Justin his due, he sort of was marinated in that growing up. His father, Pierre, seems to have had some kind of weird political fetish about Fidel Castro as like a Superman of the left.
Is that true, Mark?
The two of them did have a very particular relationship from what I saw. Pierre, after he was prime minister, would come down privately. Sometimes he came on a few business delegations, but he would also come privately. We'd have these quite bizarre dinners in which they would spend hours talking about world politics and et cetera, et cetera. From Fidel Castro's point of view, who was not a very good listener at all, it was the only time I ever saw him actually be quiet. And partly it was to try to understand the Americans, although the Cubans understand the Americans completely well. This is one of there's a disequilibrium of knowledge in a way. The Cubans understand the United States tremendously. The Americans do not understand Cuba at all. But they did come across as kind of intellectual soulmates, as I've said in the past. And Pierre Trudeau would actually, say to Fidel Castro, yes, change, but don't rush it, because it took us 800 years to develop our democratic institutions, so you can't do it overnight. And they'd have these conversations like this.
Well, it sounds like a man crush.
Yeah.
And that man crush made its way into a prime ministerial press release.
And embarrassed our country.
Yeah.
And we are being made fun of the world over. I mean, for so long, Justin Trudeau has had quite a love-in with everybody around the world. But now, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, this has become a caricature. This is this left-wing bizarre obsession with dictators, and I don't understand it, and I don't want to get my mind wrapped around it because it's frightening to me. But I think that we can't forget what Fidel Castro did. I mean, Trudeau mentions in the statement about, he did so many great things for the Cuban people. This man threw his political opponents in prison. They rounded up people and shot them. I mean, this is not whitewashing history. That's a reality of what many Cuban families faced. They have fled shark-infested waters to get to the shores of Florida because of his dictatorship rule. And it's no different under his brother.
There are comparisons being made now to the reactions to Stephen Harper when King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, not exactly a bastion of human rights with executions and stonings there, people saying that it's hypocritical, that very few people spoke out at the time about, and is that hypocritical that everyone's ganging up on Castro but not on the Saudi king?
It is true that these events can make hypocrites of us all. When Hafez Assad died in Syria, Western leaders, including Jacques Chirac, marched in his funeral parade. And it's true in Saudi Arabia, the war on terrorism has made us hypocrites because we regard the Saudis, despite the fact that they have a more dictatorial society than Cuba's, they're our allies. And so we're forced to say nice things because we want a balanced transition there. In Cuba, though, there's no real reason that we have to watch our tongues. It's not sitting on a powder keg or anything like that. And we can speak honestly. And
We're not selling them arms.
Yeah. If we sold them arms, then we have to say nice things. But if we were honest, we'd say the usual nice things someone say when someone dies. But we take stock of the fact that this is a country that needs to join the 21st century. It needs to become a democracy. It needs to embrace human rights, the rule of law. When Donald Trump got elected, Angela Merkel sent him a congratulatory message saying, "We look forward to being a full partner with America in your pursuit of democracy and the rule of law and all these things we have in common." That was a brilliant message that Merkel sent. And that's the kind of message Trudeau could have sent.
Is there a hypocrisy here? I mean, even the Canadians don't seem to have a problem with Cuba. Thousands of them go there every year.
Well, the thing about Cuba as well, and I don't want to become a little too eggheady about this, but when you are in the parsing out the balance of all of these things, there are other aspects of Cuba that one has to be careful about as well. There are difficult times in Cuban history, without question. Cuba has changed a lot in the last few years. A lot of the things that we talk about Fidel Castro now are really typical of the 1960s and 70s and 80s. The opening of the United States is really Raul Castro, the opening of the Cuban private sector. But there are other considerations that, to be truly balanced, you would have have to take as a factor the highly hostile and aggressive U.S. trade and investment embargo against Cuba, which frankly has distorted Cuban reality, active intelligence efforts to overthrow the Cuban state, which quite frankly, possibly continue to this day, despite President Obama's undertakings. Cuban history's been very rough. That revolutionary period was very rough. So there's a lot to understand about Cuba, where it comes from.
I've got to wrap up in just a few seconds, but last word to you, Adrian. He was backing off the Prime Minister today, saying, yes, he's a dictator. What are you going to watch for now?
Well, I'm going to look for, and I think all Canadians should look for, even more of a crawlback from this. I don't think that this is over yet. The Prime Minister has the luxury of being overseas right now, but once he gets to that parliamentary press gallery and they get their hands on him, I think this one's not going away for him anytime soon.
Well, it was quite the weekend. Thank you so much for being with us.